It was given a slew of medals by the French. After the war, he opened up a huge jazz club in Paris, first jazz club outside the United States. It was famous. He was a drummer in his own club. Then he was there until the 1930s when the Nazis invaded, and at the time the Nazis were worse than the Klan in the South. So he didn't come back to the South. He did go back to New York City, where this guy who had owned this huge club that had more than 200 employees, black combat pilot, officer in the French Air Force, the only job he'd get was as an elevator operator in New York City. When he died, and his grave is very unmarked, the United States government sent no one to his funeral. The French sent an admiral, a vice chair, head of the French Air Force. The French ambassador was there. It was a big deal. And so there is now a monument. It was just put up a few years ago in Columbus. I wrote, the historical marker. But we want to put up something, we were talking full-size statue, because he was a distinguished-looking guy. But I think it's going to wind up where we're leaning to because of cost is a bust. And it's probably going to be in the Columbus airport. So that's a big thing, and we're looking at identifying other markers that are already there. Georgia is unique among the other states is that Georgia trained more men. There are more training camps here. They train more men, and there are a lot of sites that have been identified. Unfortunately, unlike the Civil War monuments that do tend to get taken care of, they forget what they were there. Why they were placed, who placed them, sometimes we don't know when they were actually erected. There's a monument in Milledgeville that we're still researching that may be the first monument in the United States to African American soldiers, and was put up on the front lawn of an African American church. But it's a nice little monument. They painted the bottom red, white, and blue, and it was put up in 1919, and the Atlanta Constitution said it was the first, but we want to be, before we say it's the first, we want to really research this, because but they didn't really know anything about it themselves, and Milledgeville made no deal about this.
Yes.
So there's a lot of research, a lot of hunting and finding this stuff, identifying veterans' grave sites. There's a lot of markers that are just hidden away. A lot of them have been lost. So that's one of the things that with the commemoration is tracking that stuff and honoring the grave sites and cleaning them up. And it costs money. And again, we have a very limited budget, and all of us, everybody in the commission, it works for free.
Right. That's one of those free paying jobs.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming today, Todd. And I want you to give us those dates as they come up for the shows and exhibits, because we'd all be very interested in that. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Our next guest is the infamous Mary Clyde Scott. And we're so happy to have you here with us again today. You're our favorite person.
Oh, thank you.
We're here today to find out about the book From Graveyard Road to Silk Stocking Road.
All right. I like to talk about that.
There you go. So how did y'all get started? What was the impetus?
Well, actually, David Vickus and I were talking one day about how interesting all the families were down Gaskin Avenue and how we wished that somebody would do something about saving the history of those houses and the family, but nobody had done anything. And we just got to talking. He said, well, we could do something about it. Said we could get a book going. So from that, we started getting a committee together. And of course, we thought of Todd, of course, and then of Chris Trowell, and of the historians around town. And we just had a lot of people that came and joined the committee. Winifred, I'm going to have to look at my paper, because I don't want to leave anybody's name out of this one. Winifred Gorley was head of the genealogy department.
Yes.
And she helped, of course. And then our historians, Chris Trowell and Todd Womack. And then we had people that lived on Gaskin Avenue, like the Mingledorfs, the Birches, the Browns, Martha Evans, Luke Morgan, David Vickus, Mary Lou Gillespie. And then we had Elise Leverett, because she had remodeled the house there on Gaskin, and she was interested in doing it. And then we had some older people who just had wonderful memories and knew so much about the families and could remember the names of the children and people that we had to get in touch with. And so some of those were R.L. Osteen and Martha Patterson, Francis Wilkes, Mary Oliver Bryce, and then we had just a history lover, Sam Patterson.
Yes.
And he saw that his mother got there each time. And she just had a marvelous memory about all of it. So we started with that committee, and we started meeting in the genealogy room of the library. We started meeting on Saturdays, and we asked that if you weren't serious about trying to help us all the way through, we would excuse you from the committee. But most everybody stuck with us, and we got started by talking about the houses. And then as we talked, we began to see that we needed to do more research because we really weren't sure who had built those houses.
Right.
So we decided the best way to do that would be to divide up the houses among the committee members. So each of the committee members took a house and began to do some research on it. Of course, some of them not knowing how to do some research, we had to double up, and lots of us took more than one or two. But that's sort of the way we got started.
Well, now, I heard that when we had the meeting, that Mary Clyde, this is what I'm going to quote, Mary Clyde told us what to do, and we did it. I thought that was hilarious, because you accuse me of that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, that could be partially true. Not all the way. I did take a lot of suggestions from people.
But somebody's got to be in charge.
Right.
And the head ringer, so to speak. So.
And really, it took a long time to contact people.
Yes.
We wanted to be sure we had a picture of every house. So we really had to do a lot of contacting in order to get pictures of every house, because we didn't have them, and we went through the newspapers. And by the way, the newspaper back then always put in a little blurb when someone was building a house.
Right.
And I don't know why, but it was always a mansion that they were building.
Always.
Every time they would mention it, Mrs. So-and-so is building a mansion on such and such an avenue. So all the Gaskin Avenue houses were mansions, evidently. And so that was sort of how we got started with it, and did a research through the newspapers. Then we realized that we had to contact the family members if we were going to get the pictures we wanted.
Right.
So we started, that's where all the R.L. Osteen and Martha Patterson and the people with good memories knew how to get in touch with a lot of these people. And so through the computer and through the telephone and every other way in the world, we were able to get in touch with a lot of families. And they got so enthused, the families did, they started sending pictures. Good. And then they started calling up and say, I just thought about this story I wanted to tell you about Mom and Daddy, or Grandma and Grandpa, whatever it was. And so they told us the stories, and we would get them written down or ask them to write it and send it in.
Right.
And that's how we got the book started.
It's a wonderful book. I have enjoyed it. I use it as a reference tool. When somebody calls the museum, I say, well, let me look just a second. So that was a unique. My memory of Gaskin Avenue as a young girl was all the oak trees.
Oh, yes.
It made a tunnel down that street.
It did.
And all the houses looked so big compared to the other areas in town. When the 50s and 60s, everything was small and low. But I know that for a while there was a downslide of upkeep on those old houses.
It was, absolutely.
And I think this kind of spurred folks to do better.
Yeah, I think it did for a while there. We were hoping that it would cause more people to buy on Gaskin Avenue that could fix the houses up.
Right.
But some of that didn't happen.
Well, you do what you can with what you got, don't you?
But, you know, we learned so much about the people that lived in those houses, and we learned a whole lot we couldn't put in the book.
Well, I was just going to say now, there's some stories I've heard that aren't in the book.
Yeah, there were some children that were born who had the wrong last name, and a few little things like that, but we could not put some things in the book.
Well, now, when you write that book, I'll order 50 copies, I promise you. When we were working on the West Green book, there were a lot of stories I didn't include. And one of the guys in West Green said, if you'd include all those stories, you'd sell a lot more books.
That's true.
I mean, people know these things, but they just don't want it
No, they
in
don't want to
print.
embarrass anybody by putting it in.
That's true. That's true.
And Todd told us about the street being Graveyard Road Street. That's what it was at first, because it went from the railroad straight to the graveyard.
Cemetery.
And so whenever we were seeking a name for the book, Todd is the one that came up with the name.
Well, it's a cute name. I like it. It's kind of catchy there for
because many people were calling it Silk Stocking Road, because everybody that was somebody had bought a lot and built on Gaskin Avenue. And there was a lot of them were building to outdo someone else.
Yes.
And so the houses got bigger and bigger and bigger. And
I read in one of Miss Slater's letters, we have a lot of her correspondence, and when they were building that house as a young bride, she wanted to live on Gaskin Avenue where they had servants and wore silk stockings. I thought, you know, this just fits, and I never thought of it in that way, but everybody had servants and every lady wore silk stockings.
Yeah, I guess they did.
How long did it actually take y'all? How long did y'all actually work on this, Mary Cline?
Just about 2 years, I think. I don't remember exactly, but I think it was about 2 years. We met for about 2 years before we actually got the writing done and the research completed and so forth. And a lot of people who helped with the research and the remembering the people and so forth were not comfortable writing.
Right.
And so several of us, Todd and Chris Trowell and Mary Lou and me and the Wilkes lady, can't think of her first name.
Frances?
Yeah, Frances Wilkes. And I think that was the most of them that did the writing on the book. But once we got the writing in, then we had to figure out about the formatting of the book, and I knew nothing about that.
Right.
So I kept telling Mary Lou she could do it if she just try. So Mary Lou got down the book and started learning how to format the book. And she would come to me and she'd say, I just can't do it. I said, oh, yes, you can.
Yes, there it is, push, I got you.
You can do it, you can do it. And she did. She did a beautiful job.
It is a gorgeous book, it's wonderful.
We would have had to have really spent a lot of money to have hired somebody to have done that if she had not. And I think it was Chris and Todd who suggested that we put chapters in the front of the book that had to do with the building of the area, like about the tobacco market and the turpentine.
Give a little background information.
And the graveyard itself and how old it was and all about it. Todd wrote that chapter for us. And they suggested that part of it, and I thought that was a wonderful way to do it.
It's a great lead-in to the whole time.
It was.
Time span there.
And then we put a map in that showed the houses and how you would come down the street with that part of it and so forth. And that's what Mary Lou was good at. She was a detailed person.
She is.
I'm not a detailed person.